They did not renew the contract of Senior Director of Player Personnel, Eric Stokes. So that title, Senior Director of Player Personnel, for Eric Stokes is newer. He originally came in to be basically the guy that ran their pro scouting department. That started in 2020. Then he got the elevation to the role in 2021. Things went so well in 2020 when they went 7-9 and made the playoffs that they gave him the bump up. And 3 years later, Adam Peters is moving on from him. Here's how I view this: free agency and the draft, placed where they are in the NFL calendar, prohibit a new executive from making wholesale sweeping changes in the front office. When you're hired, the timeline is typically late January, mid January, early February, in that window. You are, if I can use the analogy of a 26-mile marathon, like on mile 22 of your free agency and draft prep, the amount of work that's been done, the planning, the lists that have been put together, the rankings that have been done in terms of interest within the organization is bountiful. And even if you're coming in with now new philosophies and you disagree with those rankings and or how the lists were put together, and you tell your guys, here's now the new image I want to operate with. Our new paradigm is this. Reshuffle these lists and spit out the algorithm that gets me the big, strong player that we're looking for, the fast guy that
Right.
we're looking for. Even if you're going to come in and do that, and I'm sure Peters did to some extent, a guy like Eric Stokes knows everything that everyone in the building thinks. So if you come in and you just blow him out, or you blow out your entire scouting department that has given you all your draft intel, those guys then go get jobs all over the league. There is more knowledge of how you view players, what your plan might be, and what internally the org thinks than you want out there. So for that reason, and probably because you also, frankly, just want to see who's good and who isn't, you owe that in some way to these professionals. It's the best practice is probably to keep the ones that are good and get rid of the ones that are bad, rather than what everyone wants you to do, which is just come in and fire everyone because the team was bad. There's always good people in bad buildings, right? So for those two reasons, I think you don't just come in and make big changes. But free agency's in the rear view. So all of the prep that you did for those players, kind of irrelevant now. The draft is behind us. So this week really is the first opportunity for Adam Peters now to restructure this front office in his image and to reshape the vision moving forward from a decision-making standpoint the way that he wants. It's easy when a guy's contract is up.
Mhm.
So with Stokes, it's time. You either pay me and keep me and give me a title, or I walk. And that makes it really easy when you're moving on from people. With Martin Mayhew, who's under contract beyond this football season, you either pay him and fire him to do nothing, or you say, hey, go sit in the office over there, write some reports. When I need you, I'll call you. And that's what they're going to do with him. I bet Marty Herney's not going to be in the building very much at all. He's going to be making money and he's a phone call away if they need him, like that kind of role. But if you're under contract and you make a bunch of money, they're probably not going to blow you out. I've been told Josh Harris doesn't like to pay people not to work. So you could get something out of them, even if they're not that significant in the decision-making process. But with a guy like Stokes, your contract's up. I'm just looking over the last 4 years here of player acquisition. Good luck to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, the resume doesn't speak for itself, or I guess maybe it does. I think it's a very good job by you laying it out. There are different calendars. I mean, I know when the league year starts, the league calendar goes in a certain way, but it's different for every role in the organization. Like, to your point, scouts, front office personnel, they just finished their year up, right? So players, their season is long done. The ownership group, their season is long done. The business department probably doesn't stop, but this fiscal year, so to speak, for pro personnel people, scouting people, they just finished. And that's why now's the time that it's going to happen, certainly.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Like, first quarter starts now.
Mm-hmm. Of this new year. So that now you begin your new round of pro scouting, college scouting, and the like to prepare for next year's player acquisition windows and the whole nine yards.
And I don't know if the contracts expire nowish, but they should. Like, in a smart, ideal situation, your scouts' contracts and evaluations where they sit down and you go over their performance, any kind of performance evals, should be happening now. I just wonder how much more we'll see in short order in the next week, 2, 3 weeks in terms of change. It's not going to be sweeping, obviously, but there are plenty of scouts that have been here a long time with several regimes. There are newer guys that came in for the Marty Party operation. I just wonder, it's not just going to be Stokes. Who else might be gone?
And you also wonder too, given different marching orders. In other words, a scout can be good, bad, or everything in between on their own merit. They can also turn in a report based on what they were told. So in other words, if the old personnel management person, let's say it's one of the Martys, for example, who's still collecting a paycheck, says, find me the guy that's the best at plugging the C gap, or find me the guy that's the best at running an in breaking route as a receiver, or whatever the case is, right? So the scout comes back and turns in the work, and this is this guy, this is that guy. He may have done a good job in that regard, but was that the right thing to look for, et cetera? You got to be able to determine, can the scout implement and find me what I'm looking for, right? That's always kind of harder to judge the work. And this was always such a cloudy thing under Snyder, is we never knew who was making what call. We never knew who was turning in good work and then getting overruled because Dan came off the yacht and wanted to make a pick, or who was really in charge. This was a Bruce pick or that was someone else's pick. Now we know. You know whose pick it is? Adam Peters' pick. There's going to be input. Yeah. And it should be collaborative. It should be, right? You have a lot of smart people in a room. Let's make the best decision. But the buck stops with one man, and he's got a great head of hair.
I mean, in a lot of ways, Stokes was the Adam Peters here. He was like the dude doing the work under the GM.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the structure was odd. I mean, maybe Peters, the analogy would be better that Peters was like Mayhew, who was listed as the general manager here, because obviously the real general manager was Rivera over the last 4 seasons. And then the de facto listed GM who kind of did some of the grunt work, so to speak, and made the phone calls and got the other GMs on the line for trade talks was Martin Mayhew. But Stokes, in his role, according to the website, oversaw the day-to-day operations of the personnel department. That's kind of what Adam Peters was doing in San Francisco. That's now what presumably Lance Newmark is going to be doing, as your assistant general manager. Everyone can have titles. Like there's titles all over the place. Everyone made a big deal, remember, when Peters was named the general manager. And on the website, it said Adam Peters GM, and then it said Martin Mayhew GM. People thought it was the weirdest thing. And I didn't care at all. How does anyone spend 1 second bothered by, he's not the GM, Peters is? You know what I'm talking about when I say he's not, he is? One of them's the general manager. It's not Martin Mayhew. They're going to change titles. They're going to sort this out. It's going to be okay. But Stokes was heavily involved here. And as much as I'm sure he's a really good guy, I personally have had no experiences with him. I've heard good things about him as a dude. It's a results business, and the personnel results for this organization while he was here were terrible. Doesn't mean he's bad at his job. He might be excellent.
Yeah, he might. Again, this is what I was pointing to.
You never know. But fair or not, sometimes it works out in your favor, probably. Sometimes it doesn't. You get graded based on, hey, how was the personnel department? How are your decisions in free agency and the draft over your 4 seasons?
They worked out very poorly.
And really, the first year, 2020, when he was on the pro side, they were great that offseason. He was working with Kyle Smith, who's now in Atlanta. That was the offseason they got Logan Thomas, and they brought in J.D. McKissick, and they got a lot out of spending a little, if you remember. They brought in Kendall Fuller. The 3 years since, when he's kind of been the point man running the departments, are where it's been really, really bad, which is not to call him out. He might be good, but how am I supposed to grade you, sir?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want me to do?
What I'd rather do is look at merits instead of excuses as to why something wasn't your fault, right? I mean, that's kind of my point about all the Martys that are still there and people from the last regime. There's a stink to me. I know these guys don't care. I know Harrison Company don't care, and Adam Peters with his great hair and square jawline, and Lance Newmark don't care, and that's awesome for them. That's really cool. But for the rest of us here on the ground, like, again, whether it's Stokes' fault or not, there's a stink. There's an air. There's a putrid smell that comes around the corner before you enter the room. It's like, oh, that's one of the guys that was here before, making all the terrible decisions. He may have made 0.0 decisions. He may have just turned in his homework and said, do with this information that I've given you what you will, Ron.
Or every time they were about to make a terrible decision, he might have said, Mr. Rivera, this is a really bad idea. Trust me, this is what you want to do.
But I looked at the analytics of football. I really did. Okay. I looked at a spreadsheet in Indianapolis. So
Carson Wentz is not the guy you want, sir. Taylor Heineke is not who you and everybody else seems to think he is, sir. I mean, maybe he was just batting 1,000.
He could have been. He could have. Here's what I do if I was him. I would have tape recorded all those conversations just to prove it later.
As a reminder, sir, Ryan Fitzpatrick is old and often gets injured, sir.
Sir.